Hello, chiropractors and car thieves. My name is Devious Guy, and there's so much to talk about these days. There's Breath of the Wild sequel, which blew my frickin' mind. There's all kinds of stuff going on in Smash. There's new games piling out of E3 every single day, and there's a whole bunch of new stuff happening in League of Legends, among others, a new game mode and all kinds of lore that I haven't gotten around to yet. But we're not going to talk about any of that today. We're not going to talk about that, because we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about Arcade Caitlyn, the new skin splash art that is currently heading to the PB. Now, we're not going to talk about the skin itself. We're not going to talk about the character model or the effects or anything like that. We're going to talk about this splash in particular. And if you follow me on Twitter or you have a keen eye, you might already be able to spot why we're going to be talking about the Caitlyn splash. And if you haven't spotted it yet, this might help. Do you see it? There's a decent chance you don't see it because it's the kind of thing that's kind of easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. Maybe you see it now. Maybe you see the contradiction that is at play in this particular splash art. What's happening here is that Caitlyn's neck is going this way, but her spine is going this way. And that is wrong. And I don't mean wrong in the sense that, oh, this is a stylization choice that I don't agree with. I mean wrong in the sense that her neck is not connected to her torso. It's not connected to her spine. This is a rather heavy and somewhat obvious, at least to an artist, anatomical mistake that I don't understand how that happened. Because basically what's going on, you have her torso over here, right? Like, leaning into her body and stuff like that. And then you have her head over here, and the neck just kind of, whee! just going off in its own direction. And the thing that caught my eye about this, what's interesting about this, is that this is actually not an unusual mistake. Even for very good artists. Because there's something that happens, like, which you know if you are an artist, is that sometimes when you're drawing a character, you're drawing a pose, especially if it's a complicated pose, or you have a particularly stylized idea for them, you kind of go selectively blind on the image. Like, you look at it, and even though to another observer, it's kind of obvious the thing that's going on here, you don't see it. Because your brain, for whatever reason, has decided, no, that works, it's fine, don't worry about it. And that happens to everyone. Absolutely, it happens to beginners who don't know what the hell they're doing, and it happens to, like, mid-tier, random online internet artists like me, and it happens to the absolute bests of us. I've seen it happen to the best of us. Every single artist that I know has made a mistake like this at least once in their life, and probably many, many more times than that. There's a few things you can do to counteract it. Most artists will, like, you put it away for the day, you don't look at it, you don't think about it, then you come back to it and you look at it with fresh eyes, and sometimes you go, oh, hey, Jesus Christ, oh, that's terrible, what the hell did I do? You can also do this. You can flip the image horizontally, you can mirror it, basically, and that sometimes helps your brain reset and sort of, oh, shit, I made a mistake here, and spot the mistake that it was otherwise not really keyed into. The thing that gets me a little... My criticism of Riot here isn't that the artist who made this image is bad, because they clearly aren't. They're incredibly skilled, especially their rendering is absolutely excellent, and they've got a lovely sense of perspective and scale that is perfectly well realized. The thing that happened here, the criticism I have of Riot for this thing getting published, is that there must have been... I mean, to be fair, it could be that they accidentally published an early version of the splash art that hadn't received feedback yet, or something along those lines, but what happened here, no matter what, is a failure of the feedback process. Because Riot has a really strong internal feedback process. That's one of the things that artists who work at the company consistently say, is that one of the best parts of their job is that they are surrounded by peers, good artists who can give them really good, consistent, concise feedback, telling them, oh, you made that thing wrong, and you should push that pose a little bit more, you should do something better right there. And when you have a feedback process like that, that's when I get a little bit, how did everyone just not spot it, and then you put it out, and it's randos like me on Twitter who figure out that there's something screwy going on here? Is that the thing that I don't know how this happened. So that's my criticism of Riot for putting this thing out at all. I hope they fix it. I hope they go back and go, hey, oops, let's just take that one back and give it another pass, because this is kind of bad. honestly, this is the kind of thing, because let's talk about anatomy and splash art, by the way. That's kind of the thing I really wanted to talk about in this video. Rather than just piling on the mistake that happened in the splash art, let's talk about anatomy and splash art. Because despite what some people online like to talk about, correct anatomy in artwork is not actually that important. Like, if you're doing an anatomical drawing, then yes, it's important. If you're doing like an anatomy study of a real human model, then yes, anatomy is important. But when you are drawing something like a splash art, like a cartoony illustration of a fantasy superhero doing some extreme magical fantasy thing, anatomy isn't actually the most important thing in the world. It's not that important that the anatomy is realistic, that the pose is consistent. It's fine to stylize. It's fine to exaggerate and go a little bit overboard and do something that's kind of that breaks the laws of anatomy, but which just kind of looks cool. And you can actually kind of see that happening here in the background with this little Kaiser who's darting around, where you can see that there's a thing going on where like her spine is going this way, but then her head is here, where it's just a little bit distorted, like a little bit. That would be a very difficult pose to hold in real life. But it's fine because, well, it's a highly stylized, you know, action pose, right? And the reason it's fine is because the pose works. Like, the pose looks believable. It's not that the pose is completely anatomically correct, but the pose looks believable. That's also, by the way, part of the reason why a lot of people probably didn't spot this, is that even though the anatomy is objectively kind of horribly wrong, it looks believable. Like, when you just see it, when you just scan your eyes across it, your brain's first reaction is, oh yeah, she's firing the gun and leaning backwards. It looks believable. And that's kind of the more important thing, is that suspension of disbelief, where, no, it is not physically, in fact, possible for a person to curve their back that much while also leaning forwards to look into the scope of a gun, but if you get the stylization, if you get the exaggeration right, that doesn't really matter because the pose looks cool, and that's really the only thing that matters. Her shoulders also, like, her shoulders up here, so, like, I guess her torso is, like, what the hell is her torso doing? Like, what would her torso be doing if this was... She would have a torso like this, which just doesn't, like, no, that's torso is, like, 3 times as wide as her hips. That's not how anything works. So I want to point that out, that it's not really a thing of, oh, the anatomy must always be correct in a splash art, but the anatomy must be believable. And this, the problem with this is that it is not believable. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, the fact that her head is floating over here. It's just kind of floating in thin air while the rest of her body is trying to do a thing. So to fix something like this, and this is going to be very, very crude, it's not going to look good at all, but like, the thing I would do would be... Oh, hang on. There we go. Basically this. And let's see if we can make it look a little bit prettier. Basically, move her head over here where it's kind of supposed to be. And then let's see if we can't do a little bit quick stretching to get the thing... Essentially this, where instead of her head floating out in free space out here, it's, okay, now it's over here, and she's actually, first of all, she's actually looking into the scope. That's another problem with the base pose, is that Caitlyn's eye is here. And the trouble with that is that she's looking, like, somewhere in this direction or out here. She's not really looking into the scope, or at least it's not obvious that she's looking into the scope, where the thing I would do to fix this is just move her head to the left a bit so that it is plausible, not anatomically realistic, but just plausible that her spine could maybe do some kind of extreme S-curve like this and sort of, like, fit her anatomy into this kind of shape right here. Because that's really the thing, is I think what the artist did in their head is, like, I want to emphasize her face. Like, I don't want to hide her face behind the gun. And so maybe what they did was they sort of move the gun a little to the left. No, I can't do that because then it gets away from the head a little bit to the right. It's probably just like a bunch of little adjustments to try and, I want to show the face because the face is really cool and I want to do the other thing. That things went a little bit wrong. And like I said, like I've been trying to say many, many times here, this is not a, this artist is terrible, they should be fired thing, because that's really not what happened here. This is an artist whom, like, for some reason their brain had a brain fart, or a thing went wrong, or some kind of stylization that they attempted didn't work, and we end up with like a horrifying floating head, like just kind of stuck with the neck pointing entirely the different way in space. So that's my I just wanted to talk about this pretty much. Like I just wanted that it caught my attention. I wanted to talk about it. I want to talk about why that kind of thing happens and why you shouldn't like torches and pitchforks go after an artist for making the mistake, but you should maybe criticize, hey, Riot, you should probably have a better feedback process for this kind of thing. But even then, like, feedback processes fail. Sometimes. Like, sometimes everyone just has the same brain fart and goes, yeah, that pose is cool, just put it in, yeah. Where they maybe should, like, taken 5 more minutes to just go, hang on, is the anatomy quite correct on this thing? That happens sometimes. But yeah, in this instance, this is a failure of the feedback process, not really a failure of the artistic vision. Since we're doing this anyway, one other thing I do is, because they're doing so much work to try and emphasize Caitlyn's hourglass shape here, right? You can see with the boobs out here, and then that, you know, leads into this kind of shape, which is very typical for like a feminine character, that you emphasize the hourglass shape to emphasize her femininity. What I would do is I'd actually widen her hips some. Like I would, let's see if we can make that happen actually. Like, I would really just, oh, hang on. I've got the wrong layer. Let's see. Like, really, I would widen her hips a little bit. Just, first of all, to give her thicker thighs, which is nice, but also just so that the hips are as wide as the upper torso is, because that's how you get the hourglass shape. Most, like, if you're doing an hourglass shape like this, you'll want the hips to be like at least as wide and thick as the upper torso, especially if you're gonna go with this extremely narrow midriff thing, right? Because this is a very, like, there's really no room for a spleen or organs in here or anything at all. Which again, if you're going for something highly stylized, it's fine if the anatomy isn't 100% correct all the time. But if you really are going for that wasp-thin mini-waist, then at least the hip that's attached to it should be wide enough that, like, the character feels solid, because in her base form, there is, for me, especially with the arm out this wide, which might be fixed once you move the shoulder back in, you know, but there is that feeling that the upper torso, she's, like, unbalanced, that when she stands up normally, she needs some kind of support to avoid from her falling over, because she's extremely top-heavy, which is an imbalance that I don't really think works for the character's skin. It's a cool pose. Like, I think there's a really cool idea going on in this splash art, where you can see they've got this radical, and I do mean radical in the sense of being quite extreme, 2-point perspective thing going on, which would be, if I try and catch the lines, do I have a clear shot on that? Yeah. Which would be something like this, right? Where you can see that all these really sharp, strong, like very extreme perspective lines going on. And that's part of the thing that probably made this pose kind of tricky to draw, is that she's in a 2-point perspective. It's not just a 1-point perspective. You got a 2-point perspective with, first of all, the 1 point, which is somewhere around here, which, by the way, is really good composition, that the perspective, like the vanishing point is somewhere in the vicinity of her face, which is good, because that leads, you can see how all the lines in the image kind of point us sort of towards Caitlyn's face, which is a really good compositional idea, because it means you focus on that thing, which might also be why the artist was kind of desperate not to hide her face behind the gun, because all the lines in the image are designed to kind of lead towards it. And then you got the other point of perspective, which is this 2-point perspective here. Which you can see is also really kind of extreme, where you've got all these lines that are converging down in a direction like this. And that's difficult to draw. Like, it's difficult to draw a character in that perspective. It's difficult to get the anatomy right, even if you're trying very hard to get correct anatomy. So I don't want to understate that this is completely understandable. It's just, when you have a feedback process as strong as Riot's, when you have a talent base and you have so many people who are as highly skilled as they do at Riot, it's a little bit unacceptable that it gets through the feedback process without anyone saying, hey, maybe the neck should actually be attached to the rest of the body. Anyway, this is, I just saw this and it got my brain going, so I talked about it for 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll try and do some E3 things and also catch up on lore and other things. But if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification icon thing, and maybe enable email notifications. I don't fucking know what you have to do to be subscribed to a channel on YouTube anymore, but, like, do all the stuff. It would be good. You can also support the channel directly. If you have $1 a month, then you can head on over to my Patreon, and I'd be grateful to receive it. Or I have some tip jars where you can give me one-time donations for... Hey, you spent 15 minutes talking about a piece of anatomy in a splash art. That's cool. Have $1. I would also be very grateful to receive that. As I say at the end of all my videos, here comes the spiel. $1 to a content creator can be the same as thousands of views, like literally thousands and thousands of views. So even if $1 doesn't feel like a lot, whether it's me or it's someone else, if you have online content creators whose work you enjoy, supporting them directly matters a hell of a lot more than you think, even at very low levels. So, you know, if you feel like doing that, we will, all of us, be very grateful for the help. If you can't, or if you don't want to, of course, that's completely okay. If you haven't enjoyed this video, there's a dislike button down below that you can click on, but, you know, just try not to notice that the anatomy of the hand, like that little downward thumb, it's not, you know, it's not quite right, you know? There's that, you know, see how, just don't notice, like, once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Just don't worry about it. Just click the dislike button. It's fine. Oh, God, I'm hyped for Breath of the Wild 2. Thank you very much for watching.